In the last video, we introduced this concept of investments. We said that you can have business investments, such as buying new capital goods or net additions to inventories. Then we also have these households and household investments. Household investments are buying a new house. And we classify that as by saying these homeowners are going to be treated as businesses who are renting from themselves. It kind of sounds weird, but it makes a lot more sense whenever you really dive into it. But now we're going to talk about, and we also introduced this planned investment consumption or function in the last video. We talked a little bit about what each one of these little symbols mean, but now we're going to dive into it a little bit more and how you calculate something like the marginal investment sensitivity and how you actually calculate this whole nice little formula down here and actually put it into real terms. So the marginal investment sensitivity, that refers to the changes in the investment expenditures relative to the changes in the interest rate. So this could be almost as a mirror image of the consumption function where we had this marginal propensity to consume. Remember, this marginal propensity to consume was saying, or the marginal propensity to save, well, they're all mirror images of each other. Well, marginal propensity to consume, so what is the changes in consumption relative to the changes in income? Marginal propensity to save was what is the changes in savings relative to the changes in income? With this marginal investment sensitivity, we have the changes in investment expenditures relative to the changes in interest rate. So then we have this nice little formula down here where we have the marginal investment sensitivity equals to the changes in investment divided by the changes in interest rate. So let's go ahead and calculate the marginal investment sensitivity. We have an example here where we are going to increase the interest rate from 7 to 9%. At the same token, the level of investment falls from 300 billion to 250 billion. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? The interest rate is going up, meaning that if you're taking out a loan to engage in some of these investments, well, that loan just got a little more expensive because that interest rate just went up and now cost you more in interest. And if it's going to cost you more, are you more or less likely to engage in more investments? Probably less likely. If it costs you more, then that means that it's going to take a higher amount of return on that investment for you to make money, for you to make a profit off of that investment. So because of that, then we can accurately say it. There's that inverse relationship. That is, if as interest rates go up, we're going to see investment go down. So up here we have this little change in investment. Well, how do we calculate that? Well, change in investment is equal to the new investment minus the old investment. So in this case, we're going to do the new investment of 250 minus the old investment of 300 billion. We also have this change in interest rate. Change in interest rate can be calculated by finding the new rate minus the old rate. Just like what we did with the marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save, it's the same basic principle here. We're just changing the numbers and we're just changing what we're looking at right here. So let's go ahead and take these numbers, these equations, and we'll plug those equations back up in here to create our full formula. So here's our formula. So we're going to say that marginal investment sensitivity is equal to the new investment minus the old investment divided by, I forgot to put the line in there, but it's going to be divided by new interest minus old interest. So that's our full formula that's going on right here. So if we plug those numbers in and we say our new investment is 250,000 because of the rising interest rate, our old investment was 300,000 or 300 billion, sorry. 250 billion versus 300 billion. Our interest rate, our new interest rate was 9%, and then our old interest rate was 7%. Now, if you notice something right here, I'm using, say, 7%, and I put in just 7. I didn't put in 0.07. That is a horrible 7. Sorry about that. Let's see if I can do a little bit better. 0.07. Much better. I didn't type that into our formula right here. I used the whole number of 7. I just took this number and transposed it in rather than putting this into a decimal for that particular percentage. Well, whenever you're doing these calculations, do not change that percentage into a decimal. Not for this example. Well, and we'll see it in a little bit, because we're trying to look at what is a 1% change going to do to the level of investment. So if we go ahead and dive into this a little bit more, and we say that, all right, 250 minus 300 is negative 50, divided by 9 minus 7, which is 2. So then we have 25, negative 25. What that means is that if the interest rate would rise by 1%, then the investment expenditure is going to fall by $25 billion. And as you see, if we would have put in decimal places, it would have actually kind of thrown all of these off. This would have been 0.02, and then 50 divided by, or negative 50 divided by 0.02 would not be negative 25, but actually it would be 25 or 200 or 2,500. So if we took this negative 50 divided by 0.02, it would be 2,500, which doesn't make much sense. So if we leave it into those whole numbers and not change it into decimal, it makes a lot more sense when we're describing and explaining what it's doing. So if we leave it as these whole numbers, then we can evaluate it on a percentage change. So if interest rates were to rise by 1%, according to our formula, according to our example, the investment expenditures will fall by $25 billion. Cost more to take on that loan, so therefore you're not going to take on the loan near as much, and it's going to decrease the total amount of investments. So how does all this look if we plug it back into our formula? So we're going to say that we have this autonomous investment of $475 billion. So what that means is if there were no interest rates, if you could go out there and get a loan without any interest rate, no penalty, and no additional cost in anything like that, then we would actually see investments, the total investment expenditure would be equal to $475 billion. Nobody has to pay for interest rates, so that's about the amount that they would actually invest. But as you start adding interest rates, as interest rates increase by just 1%, the level of investment will fall off by $25 billion. So you just plug in the level of the interest rate right there, and now you have your investment function. Well, how does that look on a graph? Well, over here we see that we have interest rates, and down here we have investment expenditures. And we can see that as the interest rates are going up, the level of investment expenditures are actually decreasing. And we can see out here that at an interest rate of 0, we have our $475 billion of autonomous investment. But if the interest rates were, say, to rise up to 10%, then we are going to lose $250 billion worth of investments. And the way that I did that was I just basically took this 10 times this marginal investment sensitivity, this negative 25 billion, and we can know that as interest rates, if interest rates were at 10%, we would actually lose $250 billion worth of investments, making our total investment expenditure right there at about $225 billion. And another thing that I would like to touch on with this marginal investment sensitivity is that the greater the sensitivity, the greater this value is right here, the more sensitive an economy is to the interest rate. So what if this particular value was not negative 25 billion per percent of interest rate? What if this wasn't 25 billion, negative 25 billion, but rather it was something like 50 billion, meaning that for every 1% increase in the interest rate, we would actually lose expenditures of 50 billion, meaning that instead of losing just $250 billion at 10%, if that value is actually not 25 but 50, we would actually lose something like $500 billion worth of expenditures if the interest rate was at, say, 10%. So the higher this number is, the greater this number, this value, the more sensitive an economy is to the interest rate. Then one last thing that I'll leave you with is that the sensitivity of businesses is often different than that of households, meaning that households might be more or less sensitive to the interest rate than that of a business, but they're usually not the same.